Good evening. I think we can start now so that we stick to the time which we have been allocated. My name is Sabelo J. Ndlovukacheni. I am Chair of Epistemologies of the Global South here with emphasis on Africa. And I'm also the Vice Dean for Research in the Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence. And it is my pleasure to introduce the second keynote. We had the first keynote yesterday, and this is the second one. And my duty is very straightforward, is to introduce the speaker and the discussant, and then I moderate the session. And the speaker is none other than Professor Tendayi Sithole, whom I know very well. I don't want to give you details of where we know each other from, but he's a professor in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of South Africa, where I spent a decade. He is also a senior research associate at the Institute of Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. He is a very prolific scholar. I thought the disease which affected me, it looks like it transferred to him. And I hope I will be better now. In 2023 alone, he published 2 books, Refiguring in Black, which is published by Polity Press, and the latter in Black Radical Thought, which is published by Lexington Books. And in 2022, he published a book entitled Mabogo P. More, Philosophical Anthropology in Azania, published by Littlefield International. And in 2020, he published one of the books which I like so much, which is The Black Register, published by Polity Press, and which is the book which made me really to propose his name as a keynote here. I know for him, all his books are like his children. You can't say, this one I like it, this one I don't like it. But as for me, I have the freedom to say, I like this one. And there is also another book which he published in 2016, Steve Biko, Decolonial Meditations of Black Consciousness, published by Lexington Books. And in 2024, we are looking forward to his other book, Black X, Liberatory Thought in Azania, which is going to be published by Wits University Press. And currently, Professor Sithole is working on a biography provisionally entitled Vinny da Vinci, a Portrait. And his lecture is entitled Azania, Extended Notes on Black Radical Thought. And I must say, Professor Sithole has actually found a very interesting niche in Black Radical Thought and its application to South Africa. And in this lecture tonight, which I know, having known him, I know he has been writing and rewriting it up to today. So the abstract which is here might actually be outdated. But I can just pick 2 or 3 issues. In this lecture, Professor Sithole is going to deploy Azania as a radical formulation of Black radical thought, and they insist that there is yet to be liberation. And this liberation will be driven by Black insurgents, which actually aims at ending anti-Blackness. And he says also that he's using this concept of Azania as an affirmative stance of Black radical thought, not only as a renaming of a country, rather it is the radical insistence of having an altered reality, the one which is not folded in the fiber and the infrastructure of anti-Blackness. And as you saw from his publications, this actually preoccupies his mind a lot. And we're going to be a little bit different from yesterday in the sense that for this keynote address, there is going to be a dialogue between Professor Sithole and Professor Bruce Janz, who is a professor in the Department of Philosophy, co-director of the Center for Humanities and Digital Research, and a co-faculty in the Text and the Technology program, all at the University of Central Florida. He teaches and writes on African philosophy, cultural philosophy, contemporary European philosophy, digital humanities, and the question of place and the space across many disciplines. We wanted him because of this other question, the question of place and the space across disciplines. He taught in Canada, in Kenya, in South Africa, and the US. So in terms of space, they are not strangers to each other. His most recent book is the African Philosophy and Activist Cognition, The Space of Thought, published by Bloomsbury in 2023. And I don't want to bore you with so many other details. I will then call upon Professor Sithole to deliver his lecture. Then he will be followed by Professor Bruce Janz. And then we begin to have the dialogue. And if there is time, then we will open up to questions. Thank you so much. Enjoy.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Sabelo Ndlovukatsheni. I'm very proud that I was introduced by a man who mentored me. And this is an extraordinary feat. And I must say that I'm delighted to be here. Professor Sesterman, I acknowledge you as well, and also your ordinary team in presence and absence. Also, Professor Ruthfuss, thanks for the patient emails and also kicking me, like trying to drag me to come here, kicking and screaming. The conference organizing team, thank you so much. I think you deserve a round of applause for doing this stellar job. Madam Crow, she's been so amazing. Like, I mean, I remember those emails, like, you know, I will write an email and then she will respond now in 2 minutes, like, you know. Thank you for checking me out and thanks for the care. My respondent, Professor Janz, and the facilitator and comrade scholar, Professor Sabelo Ndlovukatsheni. And thanks to those who are here and those who are online, and those who are not mentioned, please know that you are acknowledged, albeit under erasure. Today, I was thinking seriously about this notion of extended notes on thought. So, as the keynote was being delivered yesterday, I was like, everything has been said. So I made a plea not to say anything today, but I was told that, no, you have to say something. So as a result of that, I had to make a leap to extend my notes to change the title of this keynote to what is now called, but which is still in the same spirit, the somatic thought of Mabogo Phimure. And I will explain what I mean by the somatic thought, because I'm thinking about even the question of the space when we think from our bodies as a space through which we are thinking. So today, you have an awesome man with round glasses, the 70-year-old. It is his birthday in 2 weeks, but he doesn't celebrate his birthdays. He's turning 78. His name is Mabogo Phimure, who is a philosopher who has done, or who is still doing beautiful work in what we call the Azanian Black existential tradition. He is the one who made me think about the rightful name of South Africa, but that name cannot only be changed if the question of land and anti-black racism are not addressed. So I'm very glad to be here, to be giving this keynote under this new title of The Somatic Thought of Mabogo Pesimure. I have to advocate for a thought, and standing by that thought, I must talk about the bearer and the vanguard of that thought, and that comes as a huge responsibility. This is the responsibility that can be costly in the context where the conditions are hostile towards what one is doing and actually what one is. In particular, what one is as a specific target of anti-blackness, being black and standing for blackness. What is freedom becomes a matter of necessity. So I'm here to engage about a black philosopher who is concerned about the question of freedom, but that not only as some form of philosophical abstraction, but as a matter of necessity. And I must say that that is a huge responsibility that is upheld to be in its own name, which means also being embodied in it. So being embodied in responsibility. In short, it is having to be responsible for responsibility itself. Thinking from the locus of the black body, and I must declare that I'm speaking from blackness. So, speaking from this black body and being responsible to this body, I am in affinity and in agreement with a philosopher who is black in a world that does not want black people. And such a philosopher is Mabogo Pesimure, an existentialist philosopher of Azania, and the one who advocates philosophy in the name or the annals of what I will call black consciousness, as Steve Biko coined the term with his contemporaries, a philosophy which advocates what I propose as somatic thought. So, somatic thought is not only the thought that is about the body, but the black body in a liberatory praxis. And this liberatory praxis, it is the one that allows the conditions of freedom to come into being, even in the absence or the restraining of that freedom. So, somatic thought is coming in that long historical arc that, of course, in the condition of South Africa, which I'm mentioning under quotation marks, but calling for Azania, it's a somatic thought which is the thought of blacks thinking from their embodiment in the face of ontological denial. Somatic thought, that kind of black existentialist philosophy, in its liberatory practice, exacts that of Steve Biko's black consciousness. That is why it is a concern of black people doing the thinking about the matters of their own existence that are coming from their bodies. And these are the bodies which are marked in an anti-black world, right? Those who know, like as you walk in most of the streets here, like in Germany, as a black, you know that how you are a suspect, how like you are invisible, and then there is that politeness of invisibilizing you as if like you don't exist, like, you know, even though like that might come as unintentional. So it is somatic thought because of like these bodies, like they are inhabiting a space in which is claimed that you're not supposed to be here, like, you know, right from the point of entry, like, you know, what they're gonna do in Germany, how long are you here for, blah, 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 and then you give them the invitation letter, you know, or sometimes you get pulled, right, in what I will call aviation racism, where like you'll be pulled on the side, sir, can you please step aside, blah, blah. This is a random search, like, and then you'll be interrogated nicely, like, if you're wearing a scarf, oh, can you please take it off? Like, no, we are not, we're just trying to see, these are security measures that we are doing. Oh, welcome to Germany. They stamp you and then you must come in, right? So that is happening in a lot of settler colonial conditions as well, where in which even conditions like South Africa, like I had a presentation about Cape Town, where like black people, they know that when they arrive in Cape Town, their bodies change, right? When they walk in those structures, like you must like walk in a certain way, like, don't be suspect, don't loiter, all of those things. So those things are matching. So somatic thought comes from those conditions. But with Mabogo Mure as a philosopher, I will make a case, just to be specific, about the black body in black consciousness, to make a case about what I would call somatic thought. And to make a case for somatic thought, I'll only have two propositions, and this is what I will frame this paper on. One will be on being one with the body, and then the second one will be thy freedom come. So those are the two centers where I will frame this lecture. In being one with the body, it is with black consciousness that Mabogo P. Mure's somatic thought is more germane, pointed, and also where he makes a case for a discourse of embodiment, that one must think from one's body, right? So because of he is a philosopher who is faced by a different set of conditions and philosophical dilemmas as black, like, because like, as you know, even today, we are still even questioning that, can black people be philosophers? Do they have canons? Blah, blah, blah. Like, even if like, they are philosophizing, they are still having their humanity being questioned. But it is interesting that him taking black consciousness in its origin and development as a discourse of somatic thought, Mure is arguing that black consciousness is a political and philosophical project of blacks, those who are thinking from the conditions of their bodies, in order, as Steve Biko has insisted, of black people coming back to themselves. So somatic thought is when black people are coming back to themselves because of like they've been conditioned to be alienated from themselves, like they've been conditioned to edit themselves, like, I don't want to offend, I must say everything that is inclusive to everyone, I must please everyone at my own expense. If I do it, I will repent to my black colleagues that I didn't mean it, but it was a strategic move. We're not saying yes to that, like, So here it's a condition of having to think about the very idea of being black in an anti-black world. So if you are thinking about those conditions, you have to raise the stakes. Like, there's no this thing of, oh, I'm thinking as a universal subject, I don't see race, we are all human, let's pull together. Those who are talking about race are taking us backward. We're not interested in that. We are saying we are raising the issues that are addressing the ontological conditions that we are facing. So the condition of being black in an anti-black world is the one of thinking about ways that are creating affirmative means of coming to the self. It is the black rewriting the script of what it means to be embodied. And this stems from blackness as the black condition has to change, right? The black condition has to change to be a situation. I need us to be clear here. The black condition has to change in order to become a situation, because a condition has been created to be that which is permanent, that which must be accepted as oh, there's nothing that we can do. This is how things are. Please get along or else you'll be left behind. But we are calling for a situation where we are saying things have to change. And this change does not mean that, no, let's put black faces in there and there. Let's open the diversity office. No, we are changing everything. So when the situations change, we raise the stakes, and then the change that we want is not cosmetic change, but fundamental change, right? And this change, it is a change that must even scare the very person who is pushing for that level of embodiment. And why is this change necessary? It's a change that is necessary because in having to come back to themselves, blacks have to be responsible for responsibility itself, because freedom is a necessity. And that is why black consciousness, in having to think about Mabogo, who says, I quote, "It is the consequences of a questioned and denied humanness, of being treated as subhuman, sub-person, or animal inevitably, which leads to the profound experience of existential dread and anguish in the face of non-being," close quote. So it is having to think from that condition of having been dehumanized, where you are going to engage in the affirmative registers that are going to make an effort which comes from blackness as a matter of operation. So when blackness is operating things, things are becoming, they must become different. And blacks, as Mabogo notes, become human in the terms that resonate with their lived reality, the terms which they embody, right? Because the black body is marked. It's not a matter of it stays here, that's where it will experience racism. Even if, like, you can say, I'm not black, I don't see race, go to the US and see. You'll be reminded, right? Go to New Zealand, you'll see. You'll be reminded, right? Go to South Africa, you'll see. You'll be reminded, right? Even if this racism is not happening in an explicit way, but you will feel it, right? So these are the things that call for a way of understanding these dilemmas and how to confront them. And it will also mean also concretizing things at the level of the body, which to Mabogo, as he points out, there is a need to dwell on the meaning of the body as lived and experienced, right? Because this body is being marked by anti-black racism, so it is how it is lived and experienced in an anti-black world, right? Because this is the world that operates on the basis of the violation of the black body is that which is without consequence, right? You know, black people died, there were 2,000, yeah. But if 2 US citizens dies, like, they even send people to come and rescue them, like, you know, so because of their ontological value. So in having to think about knowing the condition of being dehumanized and thus affirming themselves, blacks who are in black consciousness, as Mabogo shows, they don't have to prove to whiteness that they are human beings. The very idea of being human, it is according to their own terms. It is according to their own tempo as well. So they are the ones who are determining the modes of being human, and they are the ones who are in constant struggle for freedom, right? And in this struggle, even if they get told, but you've been complaining about racism, things have changed, why are you obsessed with race? They don't need that. Like, they don't need to be told. They know it because of, like, they can feel and experience it at the somatic level. Mabogo poses a very simple rhetorical question, which is twofold. The first one, I quote, "If a person's humanity is questioned and denied, what else can that person do except to assert his or her humanity?" The second one that is tied to that is, how could it be otherwise? So there is no way of being otherwise, of trying to deny this reality. It can't be otherwise, right? Because of their humanity is questioned, they have to assert their humanity. And of course, in the first instance of this question, having to think about black consciousness, it is what has come in from those who assert their humanity because of their humanity has been questioned, right? And if they are humanized, it is logical that this humanity must be asserted. And they do so from courage as a fundamental principle. And then we know, you will receive a backlash, you are supposed to stay in your lane, you are undisciplined, how dare you question this? You have to be grateful. We invited you to come to our table, behave properly. Why are you doing that? After all we've done for you, how dare you criticize us? So we know those liberal interpellative questions, which are not advanced, but they appear as a backlash. So having to talk about this condition of having to have courage as a matter of principle, it is from this condition that embodiment would only come to assume the politics of courage and the politics that refuse to buy to the dictates and logics of whiteness, right? Because whiteness is there to discipline, whiteness is there to put you in your own place, but there must be that refusal. So the two affirmative modes that appear in the question that Mabogo has illuminated, they are indeed those that are located in somatic thought. And it is in these two modes that black consciousness in its radical expression and as a black point of view becomes authorized. So here simply it is black people who are seeing the world from their own point of view. Hence, the Heideggerian formulation that we know of being in the world, Twambogomore is a different reformulation. From a black point of view, it is being black in an anti-black world. So from that standpoint of being black in an anti-black world, this is where the philosophy of black consciousness finds its expression, because it is the one that has always been an embodied form of thought. And indeed, it is a philosophy of black people being embodied in themselves, which is the matter, because of they are refusing now to be alienated. They are thinking from their own standpoint, right? They are not now running away from their bodies in bad faith in order to please the whiteness, which has nothing to do with them. And indeed, in this line, Mabogo goes on to amplify, I quote, "The proponents of black consciousness described their consciousness in the world as black consciousness," close quote. This is the consciousness of those who are embodied in their blackness. And it is this blackness which, to them, it is not only a form of exteriority, but interiority too, right? Because of they've come back to themselves. Those who are resisting and fighting for freedom, they will always come back to themselves. And it is clear on how More shows that this coming back to themselves, it means that they are coming back to their bodies, right? Because anti-black racism has made them to flee from their bodies to adopt the false consciousness, oh, I don't see race, I'm the only black at the table, blah, blah, blah. So, and then you are the one who's even being asked, so what do you think of black people? No, I think they need to be, now you become the spokesperson of whiteness. But after, when you leave that platform, you know the anguish that will hit you, right? Then you play this double persona. So when you come back to the body, you come back to yourself. And indeed, it comes with consequences. That is why I mentioned the issue of the principle of courage. It's not a matter of sloganeering, making noise. It is the everyday violence. Like, you know how you will be punished, how privileges will be withdrawn, or how austerity measures will be put to you so that you can be in line. You must fall back in line. But those who constantly refuse, they know the stakes of having to fight for freedom, because freedom is not just given, it is fought for. For the reality to be altered by blacks in black consciousness, they must be those who are in charge of themselves. They must come to the realization that they are black, and it is through their blackness that they will engage in their phenomenological praxis to challenge the anti-blackness that tries to normalize itself, while it is just a mere invention that must be obliterated. Blacks must do so from their embodiment, their lived experience, and that as a matter of necessity. It will mean that they take the operation of black consciousness to its concretized manifestation. The issue here, as it has been clear in Steve Biko's thought, in terms of this concretized embodiment, thus authorizing black consciousness, is rendering it to a praxis, which is naming things for what they are. So I'm not using praxis in a romantic, comfortable language. I know that the word is just being used, but while you name things for what they are, right? We don't say these things that, no, it is not disobedience, give it another name. No, we want it to be disobedience, right? Name things for what they are. And that is where this concrete manifestation is coming clear, because Steve Biko has been clear, as Mabogo has shown, in having to foreground the authorization of blackness, and blackness as the locus standi, to be that force of those who, as a matter of disposition, are against anti-blackness, right? It is those who are against anti-blackness. They don't say, oh, if I say this, my bread and butter will be affected, let me keep quiet, but I'll speak them outside, said, oh, I support you, but in the face of whiteness, you couldn't do that, right? So, here, there is a need to authorize blackness and to even to name anti-blackness for what it is. So anti-blackness is not some mental quirk of mental disorder, ignorance, and so forth. No, it is what is foregrounded in structures, and these structures, they even inform reality, right? You look at the healthcare, how black people cannot afford healthcare, where do they stay, how many funerals, you go to cemeteries, black people, you even need to have to make appointments to go to the funerals of black people, right? You must split yourself. Oh, my wife, you'll go to this funeral, I'll go into this, And how do we explain that, right? So that's the reality of anti-blackness that has been called for. So I will say that where somatic thought finds expression is in the second part of this lecture, which is thy freedom come, right? As it is on earth, this freedom, it must be now. You are denying this, us this freedom. We will not wait for the event for this freedom to come. We'll fight for it, even in the condition of its absence, we'll make those struggles. We are not waiting for opportunities to come. Even in the moments of defeat, disappointment, and betrayal, right? This freedom has to be realized in the very act of having the courage and the discipline of doing it now. Even in the midst of fear, there is that insistence, because there is that principle of being responsible for responsibility itself. Now, the emphasis of freedom is how, as Mabogo Pesimore notes, that black people experience their bodies and they are willing to put those bodies on the line. It's not some heroic act of martyrdom, like, you know. And as you know, you will see about him that he got popular because he received the Frantz Fanon Life Achievement Award from the Caribbean Philosophical Association. All this time, the Philosophical Association in South Africa, he experienced racism in 1971, and he took a courageous step to say, I'll not be a member of this racist philosophical association in South Africa, right? And it's unfortunate that the journal of this association next year is doing a special issue on him. So when he got the Frantz Fanon Life Achievement Award in 2017, I was in the privilege of seeing that he was hired by 8 universities in 2 weeks. 8 universities, they hired him. And he showed me the dossiers of how some universities, they denied him appointment, like, you know, even if he was applying for a lower post, they denied him, and then he had to go to the US. But it is because of now all these universities, they wanted to be on the good history, and then unfortunately he went to his alma mater, the University of Limpopo, like, you know. That's where he did. He said, like, no, where I was appreciated, I'll go back there. But unfortunately, there was a backlash, like, which I will not go into. But because of principle and him being tied to his body, he refused to forget, right? So we have to have those ethics of having to refuse to forget, so that the colonial crimes, they have to be solved, like, you know. In this radical insistence, it is black people having to be authentic with themselves and having fidelity to freedom, right? If you don't have fidelity to freedom, well, anti-blackness is going to continue, right? We are going to even make it hard for the following generation, right? You know, and betraying this necessity for freedom, it means that we are abdicating from this responsibility, but we know that we are going to suffer, like, even if, like, in this, you know, mode of having to avoid that responsibility, it will linger at the back of your head. So Mabogo More shows that freedom is tied to the black body because the manner of the demands of the black body have to do with the conditions of the impossible. So the conditions of the impossible, they shortly mean that black people, when they make the existential demands, the world is going to come to an end. In this sense, if we were to calculate the amount of reparations that must be accrued, rightfully so, to black people, we know that the economic infrastructure can collapse. In one day, there won't be stock exchange, there won't be currency, like, because of, that is the amount of money that is uncountable, right? No matter the years that we can spend, or if we have, those are doing accounting, what you call the leisure book, the black demands do not fit even the length or the breadth of any leisure books. Like, you know, it is the ontological crimes that we don't even have the language to articulate, right? So the debates that we are seeing about reparations, they are nothing, right? If there were going to be the actual debates on reparations, like, there won't be language, like, we'll have what you call aglosia, like, you know, the absence of language itself. So, in having to make the demands that are in line for the demands of freedom, which are impossible demands, it is clear how black consciousness serves as the axis and anchor of the black body to be present in the world, and it is where things are rallied in the direction of freedom, and there is no room for concessions to perpetuate unfreedom. So if you take this path, like it's a clear path, like you can't go back. You've come back to yourself, and then you leap forward, like, you know. And when the body is in freedom, it is obvious that that body should be in fidelity to freedom, and it is clear in terms of the two questions that Mabogo is posing. The first one is, I quote, "But what does the adoption of black consciousness entail in the annals of freedom?" Close quote. The second question is, open quote, "What kind of liberatory praxis is involved in the adoption of black consciousness in the conditions of freedom?" Close quote. Mure answers these questions by stating the need for self-recovery and radical conversion. The two questions are obviously entwined, that being, of course, black consciousness is a philosophy of fundamental change and not cosmetic change, right? You know cosmetic change, like the change without change, like, you know, we know that it's business as usual. But fundamental change, it is that scary change, like where, like, we'll say, that's impossible, right? South Africa, like, we know that when we call for the land question, they're like, what the people are going to do with the land? Things are going to collapse. We're going to be like Zimbabwe, like, you know? And my answer is, yes, we're going to be like Zimbabwe. So what? Why is it your concern? So what? So I think we need that boldness of the so what question. And it is clear, of course, that when freedom comes with the cost, it is that cost that we should not fear, right? Because of, like, we are even, there are these scared tactics, like, you know, that are being used. Oh, black people are in charge, things are going to collapse, standards are going to drop, and usually you find that it's a black person who says that, like, you know. And please, if you are doing that, step off from that train, like, you know, it will crash, like, you know. So you need to call for this fundamental change and to be one with the body. It is blacks, according to Mure, who are having to live and act in freedom, even in the conditions of its absence, by insisting on it and making their insatiable demands in their own terms. And this will mean that they will always raise the stakes of these demands. And it is important to note that this freedom has to exist at whatever cost, right? Because if you want freedom, even in the conditions of its absence, you must summon it to presence. That is why blacks have to come back to themselves and be present in the world. So, calling for the existence of this freedom is having to struggle for it and to argue for the modes of its actualization in the moment of its unfolding. Whether it fails, whether it does not happen, whether it becomes deferred, it does not matter. The issue is having to insist on it, right? As if it is going to be realized tomorrow, right? It's not a matter of, oh, I was betrayed by my comrades, I'm giving up. No, let me settle to the comfort. So, just to conclude, somatic thought, it is very clear that it's an affirmative mode of being black in an anti-black world from a disposition of black consciousness. And Mabogo Mure's somatic thought is the larger configuration of radical thinking where black bodies refuse to be dissolved in the world that does not want their presence. So it is a mode of having to come into being, and that is why Mabogo privileges the black body as a site of thought, and that can be traced and projected in the long black radical tradition where black consciousness is one exponent of it. Land, peace, and bread. I thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. That was a clarion call. You know, Professor Sithole has, in a number of papers and books over the past few years, articulated a version of black radical thought that clarifies the incipient anti-blackness that remains in Africa and around the world. More than that, though, he improvises with a wide range of thinkers to show that thought does more than just remain in the face of anti-blackness, but it becomes more subtle, more insistent, and more hopeful. So my interest, and this should not come as a surprise to anyone, is with place and space. It is the place that is not yet, but keeps calling. It is the minor literature, not in the sense of being unimportant or tangential, but in Deleuze's sense of speaking to what we can find in a place, both the act of overcoming the shifting regime we call anti-blackness, and also on the way to that goal, even when, as in the case in the place I live, Florida, USA, and I know in many other places as well, even when we seem to be taking steps backwards, back to an obliteration of place in favor of a fantasy where there was never any racial disharmony, and it is those who insist that there was, they're the ones that are the real racists. So the story we're told. In the fantasy place that I live, some want us to believe that slavery wasn't so bad because the slaves learned useful skills. Those same people are passing laws to control what we teach to adults in universities about race, gender, sexual orientation, and anything else they can use to stoke their base. These fantasy places that shock me, a white Canadian working in the US, are the places that my black colleagues have lived in their whole lives. I gasp at the brazenness of the cruelty and naked racism. They say, welcome to my world. These are the places that Sithole describes, even though there are, of course, historical and cultural and placial differences between them. In his most recent book, Refiguring in Black, which I, by the way, highly recommend, I got him to sign my copy of it just yesterday, he describes the specter of an Africanistic presence, which is, and I quote, is the existential struggle to become being and to resist all forces of dehumanization. This is an effort of struggle, of self-definition. Africanistic presence is the struggle of the dehumanized. The nature of this struggle is the refusal to be subjected to the dictates of the colonial library, end quote. The colonial library continues in South Africa, in the US, in Germany. What were those elections y'all had in Bavaria just a few days ago? But of course, it's not just the news-making events that make up the library. Those deliberate provocations, the reactionary votes, those are just the most obvious parts of this library. In critical circles, at least, we also know about the homogenizing, pacifying effects of the liberal order. The volumes in this section of the library are full of words like peace, freedom, equality, law, justice, but it doesn't take very much to show how these are all built on the tamed black person, the subservient woman, the gay person who never makes waves and doesn't make anyone feel uncomfortable, the immigrant with no accent, who maybe even likes baseball like I do, those who have fabricated an existence adequate to the acceptable narrative in this section of the library, this colonial library. It's tempting to stay on the issue of the inadequacy of this place, the ways in which it stands in the way of realizing another place, a truly liberated place. This is the easy story to tell, although not the easy task to complete. The colonial library, like every library, is not static. It morphs to reconstitute itself whenever there is a challenge to its core narrative. The old forms of racism are no longer socially acceptable? No worries, we have new forms. We have code words. We have metaphors, analogies, memes, traditional Christian values, thin blue lines, law and order, won't somebody think of the children, and everything else we need to maintain an episteme while convincing ourselves that we're the rational ones and it's those deviants, the same ones as always, who are the real problem. We have university administrators, politicians, religious leaders, and others who are willing to go along with these stories in the colonial library, because to do otherwise would be too disruptive, too likely to generate hate mail, or too likely to land them in hot water. This comfortable colonial library, with its leatherback chairs and its curated displays showing how much good its proponents do for the less fortunate, is always predicated on the disposability and inferiority of non-whites in general and blacks in particular. And it always finds a way to reinscribe its brutal story, updated for a new age. So this is the space in which Sithole is writing and thinking. He says, enough. Enough is enough. This colonial library has no new stories, just the same old ones, rebooted for a new demographic. And he finds the resources, Sithole does, in black literature, jazz, philosophy, so many other places where he can live in the vital present that calls forth a once and future place. And so we're here for a discussion, not to listen to me. So I want to start that discussion now. And I am so glad that he started off with the title that he did, because that's where I want to start. So we're going to sit down and talk. Is that all right? Yeah, this is not going to be a, I talk and he talks. It's going to be an actual conversation. So
thank you so much for
right. This on? Hello? Yep. Hello? Oh, there we go. All right. So your new title, The Somatic Thought. And I'm really interested that you went that direction, the somatic, not the embodied, but the somatic, although it is embodied, of course. And I guess I want you to talk a little bit more about that. When I think of the somatic, I think of our nervous system. I think of a certain kind of embodiment that's not just how we move through the world, but how our bodies learn to react to things. And we can flinch even before, in anticipation of something. We can see something on TV and feel it in our gut, even though, it's just on TV, And so the somatic is a very rich sort of notion. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that kind of embodiment.
This is a very interesting question, because of when I was thinking about the somatic thought, I have been troubled for years by the question of Frantz Fanon's muscles, when he speaks about the contractions of muscles, spasms, all those things, they never break down, and including also the issue of breath itself, and as a result of that, he was thinking about the very question of combat breathing, and then how that speaks to the very notion of for us to insist on living, thinking about somatic thought. It's a very notion of having to still air. So black people must still air because of they are in the choke hold. So those gasps that are happening, they are still. But if you think about that breath, it is the whole sensorium of the body, and how even this body gets reactivated every time it has to assume a presence in a place, right? Blacks know that in New York you can't jaywalk, you discipline yourself. You go to the robots, or traffic lights for you to come. But as well, having to think about somatic thought as the very idea of having to mobilize all senses of the body, like, in having to generate thought. Like that thought is not there, the body is not there. Like there's no this Cartesian formulation. Everything is embodied. Even though, like, we know that there's a question of soma techniques, like now, like which seems to make that this body is automatic, but it is not. Like there are these forces that we cannot even explain how we do it. Like, how for us to say something, we need to make particular hand gestures. My foot has to stand on hold. And I'm thinking about also, to think about somatic thought, I'm thinking about Miles Davis as well.
Yes.
That we know very well that Miles Davis used to wear tight shoes, like one size beneath, because like, he wanted to be standing grounded. That's why, like, he didn't move when he played. And secondly, they said, but Miles Davis, why are you not moving? You're supposed to sweat. And he said, no, I'm sweating on my brain. So that for me, like, it was a beautiful concept that the sweat inside the brain, that he's refusing to play to the white spectacle audience kind of a thing. Like, so that somatic thought, it is that kind of, like, it's a kind of thought that creates other conditions of possibility.
Well, as you talk about it, I mean, it seems to me there's a kind of disconnect between, and I'm going to use the term colonial library because you used it, between the logic of the colonial library and what you're describing here. And I guess I would put that contrast in terms of the difference between epistemology and cognition. By which I mean, in epistemology, often we are asking about what justifies an idea. Like, how do we justify ideas? What processes do we use for that? In cognition, it's about how does knowledge enter the body? How does knowledge become part of the person, right? And, even a lot of philosophers are starting to take notions of cognition more seriously precisely because of the kinds of things you just talked about. And it seems to me if we took that seriously, some of the kind of rationales for the colonial structures just fall by the wayside. I mean, they just don't hold any water anymore, because the fact is, it's not just the alienated black body which is in this process of cognition. It is all of us. It is all of us. Yeah. And so yeah, there just seems to be something that the entire colonialist apparatus was based on, that it just does not describe us as human beings, period.
Yeah. And just to be short on that, like I have been thinking about even this, if you think about somatic thought, what does it mean to exhaust exhaustion? I know that it might sound tautological. By that I mean, when everything is being depleted, everything has been taken away from you, like, how do you think from that? Like, how do you start from exhaustion where you're supposed to abandon everything? And that as a beginning, like, when you mobilize other senses, like, let's think about even the issue of thought itself, like, that when thought is no longer that object, or I must engage the canon, but what if I see a love letter, right, as an epistemological text? What we've been saying, Prof. Ndlovu, like the issue of posters, like, like, how do we think without deputizing them to say, well, according to the Foucauldian mode, the poster is, no, but when we say the poster is in itself, right, a justified text. And in this way, we will not say, how is the poster justified? But we'll say, how is the poster a justification in itself? So it will mean that we will have to have other modes of refiguring how we think. Like, and if we mobilize the body as a side of thinking, like, how do we see the body itself as a text? Like, I know that performance studies has been ahead of us, like, in terms of this dramaturgy and so forth. But how is the body itself a text? Like, because of, we're talking about many other things, like the older generation that sometimes when they die with their whole knowledge that they left with them. And then we get to interview their next generations, and then we've lost a lot. So there is a need to reconfigure that whole totality itself, like to take seriously that which has been relegated to the margins and to say this is the thing in itself. Like, if we can start there, we'll start to generate different questions.
Do you know who Jean Amery is? Have you heard that name before? Jean Amery? No. Jean Amery was a Holocaust survivor, and he wrote a book called At the Mind's Limit. If you've not looked at this book, it's absolutely stunning. I mean, from every level, philosophically, just viscerally, all the rest of it. But what Amery does in that book, you're talking about exhaustion, which is what made me think of it. He talks about the exhaustion of place, like having lost place, but not just having lost his place, but having lost the ability to have a place in the world, right? So, because he realized that not only had he been driven out of his home and all of that, but he realized that he had to look back on his whole life and realize he was never at home. Like, as you said before, he was always being politely tolerated or boxed in or something like that. And so this whole book is about what it means to not be able to find a place anymore. And for him, that was the ultimate torture. And he ultimately committed suicide, actually. But it just reminds me that this notion of exhaustion is so important. And I think it maps over onto what you've been talking about, because that notion of alienation is also being unhomed, right? That home that is not, that is once was and is anticipated but is not yet, right? I mean, I've sometimes talked about the difference between colonialism and slavery, as in slavery you are taken from your home, and in colonialism your home is taken from you. And maybe both happen to some people, but in both cases it is, what does it mean to rehome? And that's what I hear you calling for in insisting on just not cosmetic or superficial changes, because that doesn't bring you back home.
Yeah, and like you're making me think about a jam session in jazz. Like, that when the gig is over, when everybody has left, there'll be these guys who are coming with their instruments. Like, they're already ready. Like, they come with their tenor sax or the sticks, and then they go onto the stage and then they throw things at each other. Like, that they are exhausting that night. And also what they do in terms of having to play what I will call a blue note. Like, it's a blue note that is not there on the notation scale, but it is there. Like, you can't touch it. Like, and then when they improvise, like when they throw this, they do this in a way of creating other homes, like, because of like the initial gig, what you saw on the poster, it's over, you've all left, like it's only some of us who don't have a place to sleep at, will stay at the club, like, they'll continue to exhaust, like, and this exhaustion not as a limit, but this exhaustion as a condition of possibility, like, and I think this is what we've been seeing, like even in the work of Mabogo, who is a jazz lover of note. Like when he was telling me about what they did in Davidson, that they used to wear the American clothes. They were poor, but on Saturday, people will wear their best clothes. They'll hold those records, and then there'll only be one person who will purchase a Downbeat magazine. And the magazine will circulate amongst many, whether they could read or not, it didn't matter. And the magazine as well, it had advertisements, like, of these clothes and so forth. So the very idea of making home, exhaustion, and it shows how the cultivation of many worlds is coming into being in a condition where this world is being denied.
Yeah, you know, I mean, that's such a great example of the jazz combo, because I think it gets at something pretty core to what I heard you saying about freedom, right? I mean, one could listen to you talking about freedom and think, well, okay, so freedom is what happens after we get rid of all the barriers, right? After we get rid of the things that stop us, then freedom happens. And my question then naturally is, well, so what is it then? What is it? But you see, the jazz combo gives the answer to that, right? First of all, it's cognitive, by the way. It's about expertise. But what happens when you're throwing stuff back and forth in that combo is that you are doing things you didn't even know you could do, right? You have ideas you didn't even know you had. And all of a sudden, somebody else is reacting to them. Boom, boom, boom. You're in the zone. You know, and that seems to me to be a pretty good vision of freedom. Right. You know.
Yeah. And the beauty that comes is, how did they do that?
Yeah.
How did they know that? Like the call and response, improvisation, like creating a community, like, you know, and sometimes like you will not even hear a wrong note, like
oh, yeah.
from an error.
Oh yeah.
Something comes, and this is where, like, you know, the beauty of Black thought is. That is why it does not have to justify itself, because in itself it is a justification. It has to be done as a matter of necessity, as a commitment. We know that it comes with cost, but it has to be done, right? And why it has to be done? It has to be done because it has to be done anyway, right? You know, so if you are asked, no, this is not important, why are you concerning yourself with this? Your question must also be a Miles Davis a song. So what? Like, you know, yeah.
Well, and so, you know, I mean, not only does somebody else say, you know, how did you do that? I mean, you may say yourself, like, what just happened, you know? But, you know, what's interesting here is that Miles Davis and, you know, a lot of those groups in the 60s were doing this under the conditions of pretty, you know, rampant racism in the U.S. still, right? I mean, in other words, the conditions of racism had not gone away before they could do that. They were doing that in spite of that. And you know, they were doing something that made beauty out of pain. I don't know how to put it. And that's no justification for the pain, right? But it is a certain sense that, you know, I mean, you talk about, you know, the existential side of this, the kind of coming back into consciousness, you know, but it's not coming back to the same consciousness that you had before. It's coming back to a consciousness that's been earned in a profound way. And so, and I think Miles is such a great example of that. Yeah.
We have about 10, 15 minutes to take some questions. And you can direct to, not to me, of course. To Bruce and also to Tendayi.
Oh, yay, thank you. I've just been sitting here and enjoying myself, but do please allow me. I'm so glad you brought up Frantz Fanon's combat breathing. And I'm so glad you brought up the business of how jazz can actually also proffer this site of somatic thought in generating visions of freedom. I'd like to ask you to please, well, being the gender person that I am, I'm going to bring women into this. Also because, Professor Janz, you said that it concerns all of us, it affects all of us, not just black bodies. And here, being, the person that I am and the scholar that I am, I'm going to say, does it really affect all of us in the same way? I want to then please ask if you could address the question of black breathing as set out by Christina Sharp, which also brings in the idea of how black bodies as spaces within themselves. You talked about the nervous condition. I want to also consider in a post-pandemic, if we are in a post-pandemic moment as well, the question of breathing as a citizenship right. Yeah. And how that basically also shapes the idea of mobilizing black bodies and in generating these moments of freedom. And here, I'd like to move away from Miles Davis and come to Nina Simone, and how black breathing also as a black feminist citizen right comes into the mix. I would want to then look at Billie Holiday, the types of somatic resistance before she has to sing Strange Fruit, right? I just like to ask you to please talk about those particular sites, because especially when we talk about a somatic norm, I'm also thinking about Nirmal Puvar's reading of whiteness as a somatic norm. Yeah, so we are in the body, we are with the body. Please, if you could take this up, I'd be so grateful. Thank you.
You've touched a raw nerve. Let's think about Christina Sharp just for a moment. Like, if we see her recent text, Ordinary Notes, right? How she writes about, and you will see that a text as vignettes of some diary entries. It is not that. Like, it's a serious, like, she writes what he spoke about, Stuart Hall writing incomplete essays. To leave you having to think from the limit, like, and in Ordinary Notes, from my reading, I'm thinking about what she's been doing in terms of somatic thought through wake work, like wake work in a book, in the wake. How are we engaging in this wake work in our quotidian practices, right? And how do we engage also in the act of refusal? In doing that, like, how do we refuse that which has been refused to us as well, right? Of course, this is not a tautology, like in that I will take, like, you will take away from me, but I will give myself in my own ways. And you've mentioned all these figures, like, that are interesting, Billie Holiday, but let's think about Zora Neale Hurston, right? The first black female anthropologist, the first black filmmaker, right? The 1920s, when she wrote in her own, like when she went to trouble the Harlem Renaissance. She's one of the founding figures of the Harlem Renaissance, right? And whom even Alice Walker did a very beautiful work in having to write a beautiful text in search of our mothers. And that as a somatic thought like that, how do I go to wake another body? I'm going to find her grave. Whether that's a wrong grave or not, it doesn't matter. But I found it, I'll put a tombstone to it. Right? And then this will give the resurgence of black ways of doing things. And when you mentioned the issue of somatic thought within the feminist framework, I was very sort of puzzled even to come through the works of Daphne Brooks when she wrote Liner Notes for a Revolution. That she took things that we will ignore, music reviews, and then let's say this black female wrote maybe 4 articles only, but that exhaustive reading that happens, and how do you produce these things at the limit? Like the voice of Nina Simone, her having been denied, even though like she went to Juilliard, right? The prestigious music school, and then she wanted to be a classic music musician, but she came like, Mississippi, goddamn, like, that making those decolonial moves in her work, and how even she turned a piano to like, a shouting voice, like, and her raspiness coming to the level of beauty, like, and You know, like when you mentioned the music scene, think about the dresses of Billie Holiday, right?
Yeah.
Even though she was clothing herself elegantly, those scars, those cigarette butts, bends, but when she goes on stage, like, you know, wearing that, those flowers there, what does that mean? So I want us to go back to that in terms of having to understand somatic thought, like, you know, there's a whole lot, and thank you for bringing that. Hence, like I'm saying, you are touching a raw nerve, like I'm mind mapping now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add to that. I want to take it out of the context of music, though, and, you know, I want to think about somebody like Suzanne Césaire, you know, who, you know, edited Tropique, the journal, and wrote in it for its short run. It was like 3 years of runs. And when you look at the stuff that she did, and I mean, everyone knows Aimé Césaire, you know, everyone knows, you know, his brilliance, undoubted brilliance and all of that, but Suzanne Césaire brings something interestingly different. And I think of it as a certain vision of a possible future that I sometimes struggle to see. I mean, it's in Aimé Césaire too, but Suzanne Césaire has this passion and this, you know, she sees the things that I think a lot of the other people writing in, you know, in that area were not seeing as clearly as she was. And so, you know, I think there's an opportunity, you know, in every way of being in the world. And I am interested in those who are able to bring something to the surface, bring something to attention that could not be given to us in another way. Let's put it that way.
How many minutes do we have? I hope they are questions, not presentations. Sharp, straight.
So, Azania, I'm very happy to remember here Stevie Biko. So thank you for this. Peace be upon him. So what about the friendship between him and Donald Woods? You know, I think there is philosophy there too. And maybe to enlarge the horizon of black philosophy, what would we say for the people who are black in spirit? Thank you. Like that.
I think black and I didn't catch that. Black in secret. So are you saying that Donald Wood is black in secret?
Spirit.
In secret, yes. No. In spirit. No. Still. So are you saying that in regards to Donald Woods?
Yeah.
Well, I beg to differ with regards to that. Since we know that it was a kind of a liberal paternal relationship, like, you know, speaking on behalf, like, I mean, see, like, his articles in Rand Daily Mail, and also how he represented, like, you know, and I'm not saying, like, don't go by the feeling, like, you know, see what it does in his work. But of course, I'm not denying the fact that he risked his life. He was there. He set him as an equal. And we can say the same with the likes of Richard Turner, Reverend Stubbs, and many others, like, you know. But we cannot not name and call out liberal paternalistic tendencies that have been continuing. And the most person who was very extreme in that, it was Alan Paton, like, you know, who wrote in his journal a piece called Black Consciousness, saying, what are they doing? Are they crazy? So I did a project where, like, I did a systematic criticism of him, because the tendency, again, of the liberal consensus, like, there's a project which is being done now to say that Steve Biko was not harsh on white liberals. He didn't mean it. He was young then, but when he matured, close to his death. He had the open relationship, as if like he was wrong. I'm making a very radical pushback against that liberal consensus, which has a lot of paternalism in it, and also to deny the fact that Biko is a philosopher. It's like he had a deputized speech, like, you know, that, oh, whites assisted him, that's why he was able to work at Sprocast and so forth. But yeah, we'll take that outside as well, like, you know, because it's a very interesting debate now, raging.
We can take one in the end.
Okay, one more.
Yeah.
Oh no. Maybe I make it quick and you can take two. Yeah. Thank you. So when you were talking about being one with the body, you talked about this assertion of the humanity. And I was thinking around how that can enable us to analyze or understand things that are happening. So I'm thinking of the burning fire. So when you talked about using the somatic to incorporate all senses of the body. So there's this burning in service delivery protests in South Africa, in the Students Must Fall movement. And in that way, you are mobilizing the body, senses of the body, because there's the smell of fire, but what does the fire do as you resist? And how can that also enable us to understand when fire pops up in other contexts? I mean, now we are looking at what is happening in Palestine, and there's fire, and then there's bodily experiences. So I was just thinking about how when we see these assertions of humanity that invoke terror in the other, how do we use what you have given us, this assertion of humanity, to sort of unpack, just because there will be a labeling of this assertion of humanity as terror, or, yeah, I don't know how to finish that, but how can we use somatic understandings to sort of take away that kind of labeling that is particular? Yeah.
As a kind person, I will take the last one up there. My God. Now they become three. If it becomes a question, not a presentation, then we will quickly take that one as well. Let's start with you, then we end with you.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I really liked it. I have a question concerning Black consciousness, the philosophy, and because Blackness is actually, if Blackness is not a homogeneous category, right? So it's multi-layered, it's complex, and the articulation of Blackness differs, in terms of time, in terms of locations, etc. If that is the case, is there then one Black consciousness, or is there several Black consciousnesses? And if so, how? And the other question is... Oh, no, sorry. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yes, thank you so much for giving me the possibility to... I have a quick question. I hope I will read it in your book, but did you work with Kierkegaard, Chekhov, and Ubuntu together? It's what I feel by listening to you, because I think in somatic situation we need a doctor, and if the doctor is not outside, it should be inside. So maybe by Ubuntu, the doctor is inside. This is the first question.
One.
Okay, this is a comment. I'm just giving a comment, which is very important. I suggest, Bruce is Deleuzian, I suggest this idea of blues instead of jazz, because blues is a site that generates all this music, jazz, because when you have a blues, you sing a blues. And I think blues will fit better than jazz, from what you said.
Well, I disagree with that.
Okay, we have discussion after. We can.
No, I disagree with that in terms of having to. Yes, we know the conditions of blues, how it happened, but I disagree with this notion of it's better than jazz, like, you know. And I'm coming from a different tradition of also having to critique this notion of jazz being understood in a linear sense, or like, you know, or it's from blues. It's like jazz existed before jazz happened, like, you know. That condition of taking Western instruments and bending them otherwise, like, you know. So I don't see it as a sort of, like, you know, what comes after, like, you know. But black people, when they were in those slave ships, like speaking different languages, being kidnapped, already, like, it started, like, because of there were those who resisted, like, you know. But we will engage that. I didn't engage in Kierkegaard, Chekhov, like, I was thinking this somatic thought from black consciousness as a philosophy itself, coming from the condition of having to think from being black in an anti-black world. Like, how do we start from there, from the embodied experience, in order to do a critique of the world, so that we can change the conditions to become situations? Because remember, a condition is assumed as permanent, but a condition, like, it can be changed. So those are the kinds of the moves that I've been making specifically. And it comes to the issue of black consciousness philosophy. Well, I wouldn't say that there are multiple blacknesses, blah, 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 because this is the existential condition. Yes, the markers of race and racism, they shift, like, you know, time and space, geography, and so forth. But anti-blackness, the way it operates, it's consistent. Like, you know, there is the line of superiority and inferiority, and then it applies in many contexts, like, you know. But I would say there is black consciousness, not its plurality, like, you know. Yes, I know that Bruce Gordon is making a distinction between the lowercase and the but for me, like, having to think of it as an affirmative stance of having to look at the world from the black point of view, it makes something different, how people are thinking from their bodies to come to themselves in order to assert their humanity. And it links very, very well with the issue of this fire that comes. But the issue is that this fire should not be misdirected, right? Because of, like, when this rage happens, it's happening with our own immediacy. We misdiagnose the problem. Like, we must learn to name things for what they are. We must say, this is disobedience, not otherwise. This is disobedience. We call it for what it is. So this fire has to be directed where it has to go. And then we know that after fire, we can tend the soil, and then we'll have manure, and then other plants will grow. So I want us to think of it in that way.
Thank you so much.
I felt like you could have gone for hours.